Hey, welcome back to Quiet Badge's Stories. I'm glad you're here. Before we get started, if this is your first time joining us, hit that subscribe button, because every single week we bring you stories about the people who served quietly, bled quietly, and kept on living quietly long after the uniforms came off. And if you're already part of this community, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from today. I love seeing those. Alright, let's get into it. She had a name tag that said Trudy, and she wore it clipped slightly crooked on the left side of her scrubs, the way people do when they pin it on without looking. The scrubs were blue, that particular shade of hospital blue that makes everyone look like they're trying to disappear. And that, most people assumed, was exactly what Trudy Callahan was doing. Disappearing. She had been doing it for 3 years at Mercy Ridge Medical Center in Clarkdale, Virginia. 3rd floor. Med-Surg ward. She took vitals. She refilled water pitchers. She stood at the nurse's station at 6 a.m. with coffee going cold in her hand and read handoff notes in the pale fluorescent light, and she never once gave anyone a reason to look at her twice. That was the point. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Beverly who had worked the floor for 19 years, had told the new hire orientation class once that Trudy Callahan was the quietest nurse she had ever met. "Doesn't mean she's not good," Beverly had said. "Means she's careful." Beverly had meant it as a compliment. Trudy had heard it from the hallway and said nothing, which was, in itself, exactly what Beverly meant. Nobody on the floor knew where Trudy had worked before Mercy Ridge. Her application listed a travel nursing agency out of Phoenix. A few hospital stints in the Southwest, nothing remarkable. Nobody asked. Med-Surg floors don't have time to be curious. People show up, do the work, and the floor absorbs them. Nobody knew about the scar that ran along Trudy's left forearm. She kept that covered with a compression sleeve she said was for tendinitis. Nobody knew that the way she positioned herself in a room, always with sight lines to both exits, was not a personality quirk. Nobody knew that she had a call sign. Had earned it in a place where names were dangerous and call signs were the only thing that kept you tethered to the people beside you. Her call sign had been Wren, small bird. Hard to spot, impossible to catch. She was 38 years old. She made decent coffee. She kept her locker padlocked with a combination only she knew. And every morning when she drove into the Mercy Ridge parking garage, she scanned the levels from her rearview mirror for 30 seconds before she got out of the car. Old habits. The kind you don't break. The kind that break you if you try. The gala happened in October, 6 weeks before everything changed. The Mercy Ridge Foundation held it every year. A donor dinner in the ballroom of the Harrington Hotel. All white tablecloths and silent auctions and people who had more money than they knew what to do with, writing checks to feel better about that fact. Trudy had never attended. She had never been asked to attend. She was a floor nurse. Floor nurses did not go to galas. That year, someone in administration had the idea to bring a few clinical staff as faces of care, their words, not hers, to stand at the edge of the room and look acceptable while donors circulated. Beverly had been approached. Beverly had said she'd rather have a root canal. The assistant director of nursing had then worked her way down the list and landed on Trudy. Possibly because Trudy never said no to anything, and possibly because someone had noticed that she was, in a way that was hard to articulate, quietly striking. The kind of face that read as composed and trustworthy in the way that expensive hospitals want their staff to read. Trudy had said yes because she didn't want to make trouble. She had worn slacks and a blouse and her hospital ID badge, and she had stood near the silent auction table and smiled at the people who walked past, and most of them had not stopped. Then the man at the microphone had started talking. His name was Dr. Whitmore Fenn. He was the chief medical officer of the Mercy Ridge system, a tall man with silver hair, who wore his authority the way some men wear cologne, too much in every room. He had given the keynote address at 3 of these galas in a row. He was good at it. He had the voice of someone who had never once been told that his voice was too much. He had been talking for about 12 minutes, about vision, about excellence, about the sacred trust of healing, when he gestured toward the edge of the room and said, with a smile that reached exactly as far as his teeth, "And you know, real sacrifice doesn't look the way you might expect. Sometimes it looks like a woman in blue scrubs who comes in at 5:30 in the morning and does the work that nobody celebrates. That's what we're really honoring here tonight." He was looking directly at Trudy. The room turned to look at her. 140 people, in their good shoes and their donor smiles, looking at Trudy Callahan, while a man who had never once taken her vitals or sat with a patient through a bad night used her as a prop to raise money. She kept her face still. She had kept her face still in places where losing it meant something far worse than embarrassment. This was a ballroom in Clarkdale, Virginia, and nobody was going to die if she held it together for another 45 minutes. She held it together for another 45 minutes. In the car on the way home, she sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before she started the engine. 6 weeks later was a Tuesday. Trudy had been on since 5:30, same as always. She had done her floor checks, taken handoff from the night nurse. A tired young man named Devin who always misspelled acetaminophen in his notes. and started the morning the way she always started it, moving quietly from room to room, checking in with the patients before the day picked up speed and there wasn't time. At 7:42, the call came up from the ER. Mercy Ridge wasn't a trauma center. It was a community hospital, a good one, well-staffed but not a level I. Trauma cases were supposed to go to Fairfax General, 40 minutes up the highway. But sometimes people didn't make it 40 minutes. Sometimes someone came through the ambulance bay doors because there was nowhere else to go and no time left to be picky about it. The man on the gurney was in bad shape. Trudy heard it from the nurse's station. The ER had called for a med-surg consult because they were full, genuinely full, and they needed someone to take a look at a patient who had stabilized enough to move but not enough to wait. Beverly was in a department meeting. The second shift supervisor was handling a family situation on the cardiac floor. The ER charge nurse, a compact woman named Shelley who did not waste words, came to the third floor herself and looked at Trudy and said, "You're the one I want." It was not a compliment. It was a statement of logistics. Trudy followed her downstairs. His name was Corporal Avery Dodd. He was 26 years old. He was a Marine, recently separated, and he had come to Clarkdale 3 days ago to visit his mother. And something had happened in between. Trudy didn't have the full picture yet, and in the first minutes the full picture didn't matter. And he had a wound on his left side that had been assessed as a knife injury, deep, that had been packed and partially stabilized but was still seeping. And his blood pressure was low enough that the number on the monitor made Trudy's jaw tighten once, very briefly, before she smoothed it out. She looked at the wound, she looked at the monitor, she looked at Avery Dodd's face, the color of it, the tightness around his eyes, the way his breath was moving. And she made 11 assessments in about 4 seconds, not because she was superhuman, but because she had done this before, in conditions that made this room look like a spa, and her body still remembered even if she had tried to teach it to forget. The ER attending, a young doctor named Felton, was on the phone in the corridor. He was competent. He was also managing 2 other critical patients in a waiting room that had 40 people in it. Trudy said to the nurse beside her, a new grad named Amir, who was doing his best, "His pressure's dropping, the pack is not holding. We need to re-examine the wound depth and we need a surgeon down here in the next few minutes, not the next 20. Amir looked at her. "Call it," Trudy said. Now, he called it. She did not take over. That was not what this was. She stood beside Amir and told him what she was seeing and why, in the same tone she used when she was describing a lab value, and Amir listened because something in the way she was standing told him that she knew things he had not learned yet, and he was smart enough to pay attention to that. Dr. Felton came back in. Trudy gave him the update, clean and fast, no extra words, the way she had been trained to give a sitrep, what she'd observed, what she'd assessed, what she believed needed to happen and why. Felton looked at her for 1/2 second with the expression doctors sometimes get when a nurse hands them information they hadn't clocked themselves, a flicker of something between gratitude and chagrin, and then he moved. Avery Dodd went into surgery at 8:19. He came out of surgery at 10:47. He was going to be all right. Trudy went back to the 3rd floor. She ate her lunch in the break room, a ham sandwich she had made at 6 that morning, and a bag of pretzels from the vending machine, and she read a novel she had been working through for 2 weeks, a mystery set in coastal Maine, and she thought about nothing in particular. That was a skill, too. Not everybody had it. The ability to put things in a drawer and close the drawer. She had learned it the way she had learned most things, out of necessity, in a place where you could not afford to carry every hard thing you had seen or you would stop functioning, and if you stopped functioning people got hurt. She closed the drawer. At 2:15, Beverly found her at the nurse's station and said, "Someone downstairs is asking for you." Trudy looked up from the chart she was updating. "By name?" she said. "By name," Beverly said. "They said to tell you they're from." Beverly glanced at the sticky note in her hand. "That they're from the 3rd Battalion, said you'd know what that meant." Trudy was very still for a moment. Then she set down her pen and said, "Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes." She went to her locker first. She did not do this because she needed anything from her locker. She did it because she needed 30 seconds alone, and the locker room was the closest place to get it. She stood in front of her locker with her hand on the combination lock, and she breathed in and breathed out, and she thought about the 3rd Battalion the way you think about a chapter of your life that you have closed and taped shut and put on a high shelf, carefully, at a distance, with the specific awareness that it is still there, even when you are not looking at it. Then she went downstairs. He was standing near the main entrance, not sitting. People who had done the kind of work he had done were often that way. They defaulted to standing, to keeping their back near a wall and their eyes toward the door. He was tall, lean in the way that fieldwork made you lean, with close-cropped hair going slightly gray at the temples. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, and he was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, and his face composed in that particular expression that operators had when they were in a public space and maintaining a low profile. She had known 100 men who stood exactly like that. She stopped about 6 feet away from him and said nothing. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Callahan." "Yes," she said. "Your father sent me." There are things that break open a person that have nothing to do with violence. Trudy Callahan had survived things that most people could not put language to. Places and moments and losses she had packed into the drawer and closed. She had learned to hold herself, still through things that should have shattered her. But there are 4 words in the English language, strung together in exactly that order, that she had never once expected to hear in a hospital lobby in Clarkdale, Virginia, on a Tuesday afternoon in November. She felt them go through her like a change in pressure. She said, "My father has been missing for 4 years. "I know," he said. "I was with him when he went." His name was Master Sergeant Colton Briggs. Call sign, Shepherd. He had served with her father in a unit whose designation Trudy knew better than she knew most other things in her life. Because her father had been its commanding officer for 11 years, and she had followed him into it at 22, with the kind of certainty that only very young people have, and only the work itself can either confirm or grind down. Her father was Chief Warrant Officer Dale Callahan, the name people used, anyway. Inside the work he had been Foxhound. He had been the kind of man who could walk into any room and within 60 seconds had measured every person in it, catalogued the exits, and formed a preliminary read on who in the space was most likely to be dangerous. He had taught Trudy how to do this. He had taught her many things. The most important one he had ever taught her had nothing to do with tactics. It was this: you don't owe anyone the version of yourself that makes them comfortable. You only owe them the version that does the job. She had held on to that through a lot of rooms. She led Colton Briggs to a small family consultation room near the main lobby. The kind of room hospitals keep for hard conversations, with a box of tissues on the table and a painting of a river on the wall that nobody had ever looked at closely enough to describe. She closed the door. She sat down. He sat across from her. She said, "Tell me." What he told her took 40 minutes. The short version, the version she would carry with her, the one that mattered, was this. 4 years ago, her father had gone dark in the middle of an extraction in a part of the world that Trudy could not name in a hospital consultation room or anywhere else. The official position had been that he was missing. The unofficial position, the one that she had never been given access to because she was no longer active, was more complicated. He had not been captured. He had not been killed. He had gone to ground deliberately, because something had gone wrong upstream, not in the field but in the chain of command. Something that made it necessary for him to disappear in a way that looked involuntary. Something that, if he had surfaced, would have put people he loved in a kind of danger that had nothing to do with the field, and everything to do with the kind of men who wear good suits and sign documents and never get dirt on their hands. He had stayed dark to protect them. He had been watching, from a distance that was, functionally, the same as gone. But watching. "He knew where you were," Colton said. "He's always known. The Phoenix placement, the move here. He knew about Mercy Ridge." Trudy was very quiet. "Why now?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Because of this morning," Colton said. She looked at him. "The Marine," Colton said. "Avery Dodd." She waited. "Avery Dodd is the son of Sergeant First Class Marcus Dodd," Colton said. "Who served with your father, who died in the same operation where your father went dark." He paused. "Your father made a promise to Marcus Dodd, that if anything ever happened, if Marcus didn't make it home, he would look out for his family, his boy." Trudy was quiet for a long time. Outside the little room, she could hear the hospital going about its work. The movement of carts, the distant chime of a call system, a voice saying something calm and professional somewhere down the hall. The ordinary texture of the place where she had hidden herself for 3 years. "Avery Dodd almost died this morning," she said. "Yes," Colton said. "And my father's proxy showed up this afternoon. Yes. To tell me that the thing I did this morning." She stopped. He saw it. Colton reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a small folded piece of paper on the table between them. He slid it toward her. She looked at it for a moment before she picked it up. She unfolded it. The handwriting was her father's. She would have known it in the dark, in another country 40 years from now. He had written in his precise, slightly compressed hand, the way he always wrote, as though he was conserving space even on a blank page. It said, "You were never hiding, you were holding. There's a difference. Wren doesn't hide from the weather. She waits for it to pass. I've been watching you hold for 3 years, and I need you to know that I see what I raised. When the time is right, I'll find my way back. Until then, keep doing the work, the real work, the kind that matters. You always knew what that was." Foxhound Trudy read it twice. She folded it along the original creases and held it in both hands, and looked at the painting of the river on the wall, which she was now perhaps the only person in the history of this room to have looked at closely enough to describe. A wide, slow river with a tree on the far bank, its roots reaching into the water, holding. She did not cry. She had not cried in a very long time. Not because she didn't feel things. She felt things precisely and clearly, in the way that people do when they have learned to be honest with themselves about what they are carrying. But she had learned that tears were for later, for the privacy of the car or the 6 a.m. quiet of her apartment, and this moment was not later. This moment was here, in a consultation room with a man named Shepard who had just handed her back something she hadn't let herself admit she had lost. She said, "Is he safe? As safe as he can be," Colton said, which is not the same as safe. But he's operational and he knows what he's doing and he chose this. He always chose it, Trudy said. There was no bitterness in it. It was just a true thing. Yes, Colton said. So did you. She went back to the floor. Beverly looked at her when she came through the doors but said nothing. Because Beverly had been a charge nurse for 19 years, and she knew the particular look on a person's face when they had just received news that rearranged something internal, and she also knew that the only correct response to that look, in most cases, was to give the person their work. So Beverly handed her the afternoon update and pointed her toward room 312, where Mrs. Okafor in bed A was complaining that her IV line felt like it was pulling, and Trudy went. She went to room 312 and she fixed the line and she sat with Mrs. Okafor for a few minutes and listened to her talk about her daughter's new house in Richmond. And when she left, she stopped in the corridor and stood very still for a moment, in that private way she had of collecting herself between rooms. The corridor was the usual corridor. Linoleum and fluorescent light and the smell of antiseptic and the distant rhythm of machines doing their work. The things she had looked at every day for 3 years and chosen not to see too clearly because looking too clearly at anything was a way of being present, and being present was a way of being real, and being real was a way of being findable. She had thought she was hiding. She hadn't been hiding. She had been holding. There is a specific kind of person in the world, not rare, but not common, who has been trained to do things that most people will never be asked to do, and who carries that training the way you carry a language you grew up speaking. In the body, in the reflexes, in the particular angle of the head when you're listening for something that isn't there yet. These people don't stop being what they are when they take off the uniform. They just stop being visible. Trudy Callahan had believed, for 3 years, that invisible was the same as safe. What her father's note had said, what Colton Briggs had said it with when he told her that her father had known exactly where she was, had watched her hold herself in place through 3 years of chosen quiet, was that invisible and safe were not the same thing. That the holding itself was a kind of work. That wren, the small bird, the impossible to catch one, was not in hiding. She was in position. 2 days later, Avery Dodd was moved from the surgical unit to a regular room on the 4th floor. Trudy knew this because she knew how to ask the right questions without it looking like she was asking questions. She was on the 3rd floor and had no clinical reason to go to the 4th. She went anyway, at the end of her shift in her own time, in her regular blue scrubs with the name tag clipped slightly crooked on the left. She knocked on the open door of his room. He was sitting up in bed, which was a good sign. He had the slightly hollowed look of a person who had been through something serious and was beginning to understand what the other side of it felt like. Not relief exactly, more like bewildered gratitude. His mother was in the chair beside him, a small woman with tired eyes and a paper coffee cup. "Hi," Trudy said from the doorway. "I'm Trudy Callahan. I work on 3. I was there Tuesday morning when you came in." He looked at her. She saw the moment when he clocked something in the way she was standing. The same moment that happened sometimes, with people who had been in the work, when they recognized something in another person that had no name and didn't need one. "You're the one who called it," he said. "I just told the team what I was seeing," she said. His mother looked between them. "You're the reason he went to surgery when he did," his mother said quietly. "The doctor told us. If it had been another 20 minutes, she stopped, set down the coffee cup. "Thank you." Trudy looked at the woman. At the tired eyes and the careful hands, the particular posture of a person who had been afraid for their child and was not quite done being afraid yet. She thought about a man named Marcus Dodd, whose name she had never known until Tuesday, who had served with her father in a place that didn't have a name you could say in a hospital room, and who had come home in a flag, and whose son had almost come home in one too. She thought about her father. About the promise he had made. She said he's going to be fine. She meant it as a clinical observation. She said it as something else. Then she said to Avery, "When you're ready to get out of here, if you're looking for any VA resources in the area, the social work team here is good, and if they don't have what you need, come back and ask for me. There are networks, I know." He looked at her with that particular look, the one she recognized. "Yeah," he said. "I believe you." She took the long way out to the parking garage that evening, past the chapel which she had walked by every day for 3 years without going in. Past the small garden near the south entrance, the one with the stone bench and the rosemary that had gotten too big for its planter. But nobody had trimmed it because it smelled good, and sometimes you don't trim things that smell good. You just let them grow. She stopped at the garden for a moment. The evening was cold, clear, the kind of Virginia November night that has an edge to it, a specific cold that wakes you up. She thought about the note, folded now in the inside pocket of her jacket where she had put it this morning and had not moved it. Wren doesn't hide from the weather, she waits for it to pass. She had been waiting. She stood in the cold garden for a little while, with the smell of rosemary and the particular quiet of a hospital at shift change. The muffled machinery of it, the lights in the upper windows, the whole enormous, ordinary, essential business of people keeping other people alive. She had been part of that business for 3 years without admitting to herself how much it meant to her, without admitting that the work she did here, the quiet work, the invisible work, the vitals and the water pitchers and the 5:30 mornings and the moments in corridors where she put things in drawers, that all of this was also the real work. That this was also what she was. Not hiding, holding. She put her hand in her jacket pocket and felt the folded paper between her fingers, and she thought of her father. A foxhound working somewhere in the dark, watching from a distance he had chosen because of what he loved, keeping his promise to a dead friend by making sure she would be there when his son needed someone who knew what they were doing. She thought, I know what you raised. She thought, I know what I am. She left her hand in her pocket, fingers resting on the note, and she looked up at the lit windows of Mercy Ridge Medical Center, at the floors and the rooms and the work going on inside them, and something in her that had been held very tightly, deliberately, carefully, for a very long time, loosened just enough to breathe. Not all the way open, but open. Wren, small bird, impossible to catch, standing in a cold garden in Clarkdale, Virginia, in her blue scrubs with her name tag slightly crooked, waiting for whatever was going to come next. Ready for it, finally, in a way she hadn't been in a very long time. Thank you so much for spending time with this story today. If it meant something to you, hit the like button. It really does help more people find us. And subscribe to Quiet Badges Stories if you haven't already, because every week we're bringing you another story about the people who serve in the shadows and carry more than most of us will ever know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.